Hello and welcome back to the Innovate Eco podcast and the Startup Diaries mini-series, where we are creating our own planet positive company right here on the podcast and documenting it as we go. I'm joined as always with my co-host and co-founder of the said company, Matt. How you doing?
Hello, I'm very good. How are you?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm good. The sun is no longer shining after a few weeks of lovely sunshine, so I've had to turn the studio lights up extra bright, so my mind feels like it's still sunny.
It's very sunny here, if that makes you
Okay.
feel better.
Yeah, for listeners who don't know, we're actually at slightly different ends of England. I'm up in the slightly rainy Peak District and Matt down in the capital in London. Hence why we're never in the same room when we're recording this. It'd be a bit weird if we were just in the same.
Maybe one day we will. When you say it's a mini series, I thought we were doing this forever.
Yeah, maybe I need to stop calling it a mini series. It's like a side series, a
Mega series.
mega series. My plan, I'm bringing the main podcast back soon. I've actually got a couple of interviews lined up in a couple of weeks' time. After a little break, I've suddenly found, unsurprisingly, there's loads of new founders out there building interesting stuff. So I've got a few lined up to interview, and then we'll start releasing those fairly soon. So I guess that's what I mean. At the moment, we're just putting out episodes of the Startup Diaries, so it's very much the main thing. But
I see.
yeah, maybe mini series is the wrong term. But if you can think of a better term, then I'd love to hear it.
Okay, the sidecar.
Side quest?
Yeah, nice.
Okay, side quest. We'll think of something anyway. That's not the most important thing. The most important thing is continuing to try and build the brand that we're trying to build, which is no longer known, which is, I mean, I could launch straight into the elevator pitch right away if we want, or shall I talk about what we're going to talk about on this episode first of all?
We can say, I think, within what we're talking about today.
Okay, so today, which is what we were meant to talk about in the last episode, but we got a bit sidetracked into the topic of AI art, and I thought that was actually quite an interesting discussion in the end. But what we were meant to be talking about last time, which we'll talk about in this episode instead, is the production of the clothing, the production of the t-shirts, the how we do that in a sustainable way and a cost-effective way. And Matt's been doing lots of research into this, kind of looking into ordering samples, the complexities it's going to bring in for what we're trying to do, which is build smaller release numbers, and how do we manage that, and how do we ship them potentially around the world into different countries, particularly when certain countries are bringing in things like tariffs. It could be very interesting, but that's a much deeper discussion further down the line, I think, in terms of, for now, it's like how do we produce these t-shirts in a sustainable, equitable, and cost-effective way that is actually going to make business sense. So that's the topic of today's episode. Does that sound about right, Matt?
Sounds good, yeah.
Cool. So before we start, shall I have a go at the tradition?
Yeah.
The
Remind
elevator
everyone
pitch?
what this is all about.
Yeah. So for anyone that hasn't listened so far, I do recommend, go back and listen to the other episodes where we started talking about everything from the brand to how we market and things like that. But at the start of every episode, it's become a little tradition that I try and do an elevator pitch from memory. And it started off very long and rambling, so I'm hoping I get a bit closer. I'll see how clear my mind is on this Sunday morning that we're recording. So here goes. No Longer Known is hoping to be the first truly planet positive clothing brand. We're planning to use limited drops and scarcity to drive awareness and impact, not just hype. And we'll be doing that by releasing unique designs of an endangered species where the number of that design is linked to the approximate number of that species left in the wild. And we'll be doing it in collaboration with artists local to that species and donating some of the profits, a percentage of the profits, to a conservation organisation that's working in the region where that species is found. A couple of ums and mumbles, but getting closer.
I think the actual the content's pretty much there. You just need to hone it.
Thank you. I think depending on how much caffeine I've had, maybe I'll get closer.
It's quite early in the morning, to be fair. But what if you're in the elevator on the way down from your hotel room?
Well, exactly. You've got to be prepared. You don't know where you're going to bump into someone. I think it's going to be trickier to get it more brief than that. I was having a
Yeah,
think like there are ways you can do it, but you always have to leave out certain elements, and obviously that's sort of fine. And I think depending on who the audience is, maybe you could leave out things like the artists and the
yeah,
donations. That's kind of like it's like not brands don't necessarily talk about all their values and impacts.
that's what I was gonna say. If you're talking to someone with a specific interests or like mission, you could tailor it towards them and
Yeah,
skip over some other stuff. And then if they are interested, then the rest of it would come with a couple of questions.
exactly. So maybe that's the next phase of the elevator pitch, try and get it down to just one floor. Someone was probably timing that. I think it wasn't much longer than 30 seconds, which is the recommended amount. Right, so in today's episode, as we said, we're going to be talking about production and all that kind of side of things, and I'll be asking Matt loads of questions, basically a live catch up on all the research that Matt's been doing on this subject, which I'm excited to hear about and see what he's found. I mean, just a little bit of context. This wasn't really, when we first started discussing the idea, the sustainability angle and the fast fashion angle wasn't really the first thing that drove the excitement behind the idea, but it's become more and more of a key element, and particularly through my work in my day job, where I work with a lot of companies who are trying to reduce their impact on nature specifically, but usually that brings in climate and other environmental impacts as well. It's like fashion is one of the big industries that always comes up as like having a big impact and stuff.
I think it came out of conversations. Well, it's basically quite a natural conversation of would we want to do something that's positive within the world of fashion. It wasn't long until that issue came up, and it would have felt quite hypocritical to not address that within our plan.
Yeah, and like quite a lot of the early people that signed up or that found the idea interesting said that was their one caveat. They were kind of like, yeah, but I'm trying to buy less. I'm trying to not contribute towards fashion waste as much. So I'm a bit conflicted. So we were like, right, this needs to be baked into the brand from the start. And there's the thing I always say is that demanding perfection is never the answer, and there's a lot of middle ground for us to make a big impact. You've got Shein and fast fashion on one end, which literally don't care. Just their whole business model is about pumping out as much stuff as possible. And then you've got the other end of the extreme is someone would say, well, there's enough clothes, there's enough stuff, we never need to make anything ever again. And there's a huge middle ground, and hopefully we'll be closer to that, to the latter, and producing just the right amount and much higher quality. But there's as with all these environmental arguments, it's very easy to be like, just do nothing, or you have to be perfect, and that's always the challenge.
I think that is a trap that I fall into sometimes, but I think, that we would be quite a boring podcast.
I just think there's so much that we can do to improve the current situation, and by working through some of these things in real time, like on the podcast and in what we do, I think we'll probably uncover some stuff that we're unaware of and that people are unaware of, and hopefully it raises the issue as well. Like by shutting it out and demanding perfection, and it doesn't even become a discussion. It's kind of built into the whole brand philosophy. So I was doing a bit of research on just how bad this issue is, and the thing that jumps to people's minds, I guess, is the waste and seeing trucks full of garbage and fast fashion, or stuff that's meant to have been sent back, and then it turns out it's cheaper for the companies to not recycle it and to just put it in landfill. So that's the big one that jumps out. But the figure I found is like 2 million tons of textile waste created annually. It's a garbage truck full every second, apparently, and less than 1% of that currently is recycled. So that's pretty crazy. And then there's like the issue of microplastics that comes out of that. Between 2000 and 2015, production doubled, apparently, which is pretty mad. People love clothes.
Yeah.
And consumers throw away, on average, 60% of clothes within a year of purchase. So there's a quality element
That
to
is
it as well.
mad. I actually, without wanting to boast too much, feel like I'm very good at wearing my clothes into the ground. I
Yeah.
recently threw away a t-shirt that I got, I think, 15 years ago, and I was told by Becca, my partner, that it needed to go many times because it's just full of holes. But that lasted pretty long. So I would like our t-shirts to be a similar quality that maybe after 15 years they could get, might start having a few holes in, but even then,
Yeah, I'm the same. I've got a few t-shirts I very still cling on to, very reluctant to throw away. And ideally, if there was a way I could get them remade, like I
mm,
was, that's something that we've discussed trying to do at some point. But first and foremost, if we can create something that people value, that there's a story behind, that they want to look after, and it's not just going to be thrown away within a year,
mm,
then that's kind of really the first and foremost thing that we want to get right. Weirdly, I think part of that is like building in this. We mentioned it on an early episode. People kind of said were surprised when we were talking about slightly higher price points, and that's going to be an interesting challenge. But when you do explain everything we're trying to do, people do come around to it. And yeah, the reality is with anything, if you spend a bit more money on it, you're probably less likely to buy 10 of them, but you're more
well, yeah,
likely
that's
to
true.
cherish that one. So yeah.
Literally, yeah, it has more value, not just psychologically.
And then the other impacts of the fashion industry are probably maybe not as well known to the general public. And I don't know if you've kind of been coming across some of this stuff and claims, but on the environmental side, there's the cotton industry is pretty intensive in certain areas of the world, and it like uses a lot of inputs and pesticides and stuff. So
Mm,
that's not great. And one of the big things that we need to think about, like pretty seriously, I guess, like as a new company, if we end up being successful, like it's important to think about these things now, is they rely a lot on water, and a lot of the cotton farms are in really water scarce regions that are becoming more and more subject to drought. So cotton is a commodity. A lot of companies don't even know where it comes from in their supply chain. The mad thing I hadn't really thought about is how little some of these huge international brands know about where their stuff comes from.
yeah, that is quite scary.
It's like, yeah, we just buy it from some guy who sources it from some other guy who gets it from somewhere in India. I'm sure it'll be fine.
Yeah, that is. It kind of reminds me of there's a whole thing about chocolate recently, where like chocolate suppliers like cannot. There's no way that they can guarantee that slaves weren't used in the
Yeah.
production at some point. It's like even if they tried to find out, it's not possible. Just crazy to think.
Yeah, that's got yeah. Like Tony's like had to go back on their claim, didn't they?
Yeah,
Saying it was completely slave free because they couldn't say. And I think there's a similar parallel in a lot of the textiles world. I think it's not quite so opaque, but there's still a lot of that. And yeah, like so the water use is a big one, and that's all the stuff you just said is linked into the ethics as well, like making sure that people are paid a fair wage and all that. And we've just got so used to paying nothing, even using slavery, as you said, in some cases, getting like, and then you go, well, to sell a t-shirt for £1, like, or whatever some companies manage to do, like that, those are the impacts. It's the environment and people pay the price. So
yeah,
yeah, like very difficult for companies to go backwards. This is the thing I'm finding in my job is like for a big company, like I won't name any names, but a big fashion company to suddenly go, we're going to change our ways. Their whole business model is built around
yeah,
the old way. So to change it is so hard. So we've got like a really unfair advantage in a lot of ways because we can do it from the start and like price it all in. But yeah.
yeah, yeah. It's good. I mean, yeah, you'll be pleased to hear a lot of these things you mentioned have come up in my research, so we can get into those in a bit more detail.
Yeah. So yeah, that's hopefully sets a little bit of the context for some of the challenges of the fashion industry. There's a few. I think as everything at this brand, it's going to be an iterative process. We'll probably start out with the best that we can do, and then we can just keep pushing and pushing, and eventually maybe we'll have our own factories or producers, and we can do things like to the gold standard. But we're really tied into what's out there. But it sounds like there's some good stuff going on. So yeah, I guess Matt, let's dive into what you've found so far.
I guess the first thing to say is at this point, we're not setting up our own t-shirt factory. So,
That would be
yeah, you
bold.
kind of mentioned this before. We're not going to be in complete control of everything at this stage. Maybe at one point we'll get to that, but at the moment, very much limited to what is available. So yeah, I guess it was a combination of kind of your traditional Google research, but then also the, I've been paying a lot more attention to the supplier slash manufacturers of t-shirts in various locations. One of which is, as previously mentioned on the podcast, the Crab Museum. They
They're not
are
our
like,
sponsor, by the way, but they
no,
should be.
but
I
I
might
mean,
reach out to them. You've been mentioned in at least 2 episodes now.
I'm happy for them to get the publicity. They are doing great work.
Yeah, true.
But yeah, I use them as a kind of barometer for social values across everything. Like they're very active on social media when there's anything, even completely non-related to crabs. Their values align with mine almost across the board. In fact, they've never said anything that I disagree with. And they talk about sustainability and climate change and animal protection quite a lot. So I thought, well, the t-shirts that they sell in their gift shop, surely somebody's done a bit of research into something that's sustainable.
Surely.
And having looked up the manufacturer, that is the case. So they use a company called Continental Clothing, which is basically a company that sell specifically like blank apparel that people buy to create like merch or yeah, their own kind of line of clothing. Not all of their stuff is like super sustainable, but they have a range called Earth Positive, which is kind of like geared towards being more sustainable. I should say, are these kind of like their business is selling blank versions of clothing for people to then customize and resell. A company called Stanley Stella seem like the one of the biggest ones doing this in the context of sustainability. Then the third one is this company called Rowe and Ritzy, which are a lot smaller and I think like slightly more mysterious. They seem less established from their output, and I get the impression they might be a lot smaller, but they have a kind of website that makes it seem like they're bigger than they are. They also are less easy to find like costs for, which makes you think it'll be more expensive. They do have a lot more options for materials. So the other two, basically, it has to be cotton. Whereas Rare and Ritzy have a mad selection of materials. I'm going to try and find the list here.
Wow. Yeah, because it's just starting in the cotton sphere. There's like a lot to consider when it comes to
Yeah.
quality and sustainability, but
So they
bringing
have
in other materials.
bamboo, hemp, banana leaf, I think it is.
Wow.
Which, like, all seem interesting and potentially could be more sustainable, but it's like, yeah, if we're talking about tracking supply chains and stuff. Basically, the only reason this company is added in is because of that other angle of different
Yeah.
materials. But in terms of where we are now and like the ease of getting samples and the ease of getting things printed, they've kind of dropped off slightly. So basically, it's come down to Continental Clothing and Stanley Stella for me at the moment. I'd like to do an honourable mention to T-Mel, who
Yeah.
you spoke to on the main version of the podcast a while ago. We were in the running for a bit, but all of their options are very standard in terms of like, without having to be too dismissive, it's kind of just a t-shirt.
Yeah.
Very bog standard, like male man t-shirt, woman t-shirt. Whereas these other two, it's not like a huge range, but there are some more interesting like fits, I
Yeah.
guess.
Yeah.
Like more interesting details. One of the samples I ordered has like a slightly wider collar hem, which is I think quite nice. And I feel like because we are angling this as like a premium product, I feel like it can't just be like any old t-shirt.
Yeah. I agree. Like the T-Mill and it's a great model and they do some really cool stuff, but it's more angled towards I'm a brand like a conservation charity or whatever already, not a clothing brand, and I want to make some t-shirts, or I'm a band or something like that and I want to make some
Yeah.
t-shirts, which is their model, whereas this is the core of our business. And we've said we're happy for it to be a bit more expensive, but we want it to feel more unique. If you like, I know like some of the bigger clothing companies obviously own their own factories, but there's a lot of like very big brands that don't, that you
Yeah.
wouldn't think about that. You'd be like, I'm buying a top from this brand. I'm not buying something which is from T Mill that is, So
Yeah. And we'll
that's
get onto that later actually,
yeah.
because one of the services that one of the resellers I found offers is taking the label of the manufacturer out.
Okay.
So you can't even tell where it came from, which is like, I don't know if you want to do that, but it's kind of interesting if you really want to make it feel like it's
Yeah.
your own
Interesting. I
product.
think there's a difference between that and I want to be super transparent about everything from the start. So, and I guess on that, before we get into more about the logistics of making it and stuff, on the just sticking with the sustainability angle to start with and their credentials, like how did those two compare? Like how did they compare to someone like T-Mill as well?
Yeah. So
How transparent are they, and what? I bet you learned a bit about the challenges because there's only so much you can do, I
yeah,
guess.
I mean, so there's a few things. I'm kind of leaning quite heavily on their certifications, and I'm sure you know more about this than I do, but I've definitely heard. I've heard this in like the food industry that some of like the certifications that people get are like, not actually that meaningful.
Yeah, there's a lot of greenwash, I guess you could
Yeah,
call it, in some of those. They just stick a label on it, and then you're like, what does it
yeah.
really mean?
So I guess there's three things that I've been looking at. There's what they actually say on their own website. So obviously that's quite biased because they're going to say that it's amazing. There's what certifications it has. And then sometimes those certification companies, I'll go into in a little bit more detail, they have like a ranking where they rank these companies against each other in terms of
Okay.
like their realm.
Yeah, yeah,
So
yeah.
like it could
That's
be,
handy if you can see it in a kind of league table format.
yeah. And then I don't know if we've mentioned this on the podcast before, but we've definitely talked about it off pod. Is the website Good on You, which is a kind of fashion. I don't know what they call themselves, a fashion directory,
Yeah.
where you can basically their whole thing is they will basically give you an idea of like how good a fashion brand is in the realms of planet, people, and animals,
Mm.
and they give everyone a score. They give each company a score out of five for each of those three things, and then generate an overall rating, which is it's like a smiley face
Yeah.
system of like really unhappy, unhappy, neutral, happy, or really happy.
Yeah.
All of these scored like the top marks in that
Yeah. Nice.
in the overall rating. Only Stella scored 5 out of 5 for planet, 5 out of 5 for animals, but only 4 out of 5 for people. The reason why it dropped a mark for people is like um, they couldn't provide evidence that ensured all workers are paid living wages in the whole supply chain.
And that's probably just again like what we discussed before, like actually figuring out supply
Yeah,
chains are so complex in something like fashion. I'm sure they're doing their best to try and figure that out, but sometimes it
yeah.
is like literally impossible.
And then, but interestingly, T-Mill scored one less on that. They got 3 out of 5 for people, which I found surprising because I thought they would be great at everything.
Yeah. And then they like talk very openly about all the work they're doing and the kind
Yeah,
of help they're doing in factories and stuff like that. So even for them, who are very open about that, it just really makes me despair at like what some of the conditions and some of the situation must be for some of the 1 out of 5 brands.
yeah. And then annoyingly, Continental Clothing isn't on Good on You, so
Okay.
it's difficult to compare.
But I guess when you're looking through the list of what they do and their credentials and stuff, is it very similar?
It is similar, and also, so one of the accreditors is a organization called Fairwear. I don't know if you're familiar with them, and that's basically like they monitor the human rights aspects of like people who are employed in the supply chain. So this on their website, they have a bit that's about how they make an impact. So it's adopting responsible purchasing practices, applying a gender lens, supporting access to remedy. Don't know what that means. And defining meaningful stakeholder engagement. But in general, they're about the working practices rather than the actual like sustainability of the product. I need to do a bit more research into this, but I think you have to be quite good anyway to get their accreditation. But even when you
Yeah.
had it, you get a score. Only Stella got like 74 out of 100, which was described as like good, and then Continental Clothing got 84,
Wow.
which was described as great.
Yeah.
So they're slightly better, but I think like the fact that they both have that accreditation is quite good.
Interesting.
Then in terms of the sustainability, I feel like I'll need to get you to read some of these things because Stanley and Stella, for example, have a sustainability report that they publish on their website, which would probably mean a lot more to you than it does to me. They also have a load of certifications like global recycled standards, global organic textile standards.
These like standards and stuff coming out now is very confusing for the consumer. It's
I
quite a
guess it's
lot.
just like if you've got loads, people assume it's great, and
Yeah.
then you don't dig into it too much.
Yeah. And
But
we're basically layering up on our impact on top of that. So we're doing stuff through our brand, like we're giving money to, so they might be doing some stuff that makes them more nature positive, like doing some, I don't know, like some of their own contributions to conservation, whatever it might be. But we're laying on top again. So as long as we've got a good baseline from them and they're mainly trying to minimize the negative impacts as much as possible, I'm more interested in that than them doing like loads and loads of above and beyond positive stuff because
yeah,
that's what we're bringing to the table. So
yeah.
sounds
So I think
interesting.
we still have a little bit more work to do digging into it, but I basically have lent into Stanley Stella as
Okay.
the final conclusion, and the
Yeah.
reason for that is I think because of the size of the company, they are much more readily available than Continental Clothing. Continental Clothing, you basically have to buy through them, and they have big minimum orders because I think it's geared up for much more established organizations.
I mean, let's
Whereas,
come on to that in a sec. So I think on like
okay,
just drawing a line under the on the sustainability stuff, I think we should get someone on a future episode who is like an expert. I'll do some digging into those certifications and stuff and try and figure out a bit more. It sounds like these companies are the best options out there from what you've done, and then we'll try and get someone on who's a bit of an expert to maybe go over it and just double check that they agree and
yeah, yeah,
someone
that
because
sounds good.
I think I could do with all these things. I could do all the research in the world, and I think just getting someone in the room we can chat to
Yeah,
about the potential pitfalls and things to watch out for. I think that could be interesting. So let's bring that back in a future episode. But yeah, like in terms of the actual, the next big thing after sustainability is probably an even more important thing for actually getting us off the ground is like how is it going to work logistically with our model of scarcity and limited drops and things like that. So yeah, what did you find on that side of things with
so
these ones?
yeah, so both of the companies you can buy through them, and they will do the printing for you, and I think potentially even the distribution, like direct to consumer.
Okay.
The issue is if you buy through them, there's big minimum orders,
Yeah.
which I think for us, I think eventually it could work, but then
What are
I
you
guess
talking when you say big?
like 500,
Okay.
which like
Yeah, eventually.
kind of, well, you say eventually, but like our whole thing is based around the specific numbers relating to animals. So if we're doing a drop that's 100, then they wouldn't work,
Yeah, that's
which
true.
is kind of why I've ended up where I am now, which is going through a third party. Which kind of, at first I was like, ugh, this is like another step in
And
the thing. It's
yeah.
kind of annoying. Uh, because, um, because Stanley Stella are big enough, they have like a list of approved dealers. which means that if you go through one of them, they already have quite large quantities of their products in stock, so you don't have to buy large quantities. You can get one-offs,
Yeah.
which is how I ended up getting samples of like 4 different types of t-shirt from
Right.
these studios. There's quite a lot of them. They vary quite a lot in price, and I also imagine they vary quite a lot in quality. It's it's going to be impossible to get print sample from everyone. So at the moment, I basically landed on a studio that seem like they know what they're doing and aren't crazy expensive. Some of them, and kind of for like understandable reasons. If you're just buying one, some of the costs are going up to like 70, £80 a t-shirt if you're getting it printed in multiple locations.
Yeah. Wow.
So for example, there's this company called Go Custom Clothing, which are like a huge, I get the impression they're a huge company. They do like next day delivery on like bespoke t-shirt printing. So it's like,
Yeah.
I'm imagining there's a huge operation behind that. They were going to cost like £75. And for these tests, I've been doing a print on the front, a print on the back, a small print on the back, and a print on the inside neck.
Nice. Yeah.
I'm not saying that we need to do those for the final thing, but I thought it's good to
You want to
like
see the quality,
get a
right?
feel for it. Yeah. I also, I mean, this is a bit of a side note. We can get onto this later, but I think having an inside neck print, I think, is quite important because I've got some t-shirts from small, uh, I guess, brands or just like ones that people have made. And when there's no label or nothing in the neck, it's just like, it doesn't feel like it's a real thing.
No, I
And I
agree.
think
Doesn't
to
feel
get like,
premium, right?
to make it feel a bit more legit, I think we could have no longer known in the neck and then maybe even like the name of the artist and the name of the animal, and that could change every t-shirt just so if the person forgets what their animal is, they can always
Yeah,
check.
and brings in that kind of level of I don't know, authenticity as well.
Mm,
Yeah, I think I agree with you. It's meant to be a premium product, and trying to charge a bit more. I think that is all
yeah.
part of the story, and it will help with that willingness to pay a bit more.
So then I ended up finding a studio called Get a Grip, which is
Right.
an interesting name for a print shop. Not to be confused by it with another company called Get a Grip who make quite jazzy tennis racket grips.
Cool.
Shout out to them.
Yeah.
They're quite cool. Now, this studio is based in the West Midlands of the UK, and yeah, they basically like ticked all the boxes. They're an approved seller for Stanley Seller. They seem to have their own like sustainability goals.
Okay.
So they use 100% water-based screen print ink. They're vegan approved, and they talk about using sustainable materials. So like as a start, compared to a lot of the other companies I was looking at, they don't even mention sustainability. So
Yeah.
obviously we're adding another step in the chain here, but yeah, it's good that they did that.
Mm.
It's also not crazy expensive for just ordering one. Um, and also like they offer a lot of other interesting services, which I think will eventually be really important to us,
Mm-hmm.
which include, like I mentioned briefly earlier, like taking labels out. If there's already a label in the t-shirt, putting a new label in, they can like wrap it, like
Mm.
fold it and wrap it ready for
Yeah,
like
packaging is going to be
distribution.
a big part. I really want it to be a premium unboxing experience, as they would call it in them.
Well, yeah, I think I don't, maybe we talk about that later, or maybe like it's whole episode because I've got a lot of thoughts about that.
Okay, interesting. But on your point, point around just quickly on your point around next day delivery and stuff like that. I actually think doing making sure that it's not that is quite key. I know like
Mm,
occasionally people want to buy it as like a Christmas present and they've forgotten stuff, but I think actually pushing back a bit on that expectation of like you can have stuff instantly is quite good.
yeah,
And
definitely.
it's built into the whole way that we do the drops anyway, is that there will be a period of like pre foreshadowing and talking about the artist and registering your interest. And then once we've got to a critical mass, we can put in an order, and that's just a much more sustainable way of operating on the business side of things for anyone that's starting a business. Like, I follow a couple of brands that do this really well. There's one called Switch Bikes. I don't know if you've come across them, which is basically making any bike into an electric bike.
I think we talked about them before,
Yeah,
potentially.
maybe. And they just run their business exclusively like that. So they go like, we're doing another release at this price, and then they have like 100 or something, or 1,000. And then once they've sold out, then they go off and manufacture 1,000.
Yeah.
And there's like a 2 month waiting period, but people are fine with that. So
I think
anyway,
it's nice. It like builds anticipation as well. If we're thinking about people being invested, I feel like if you can get something the next day, its meaning is diminished.
yeah, and that's like one of the big selling points of some of the companies, again, like T-Mill or some of the big brand for straight to consumer, just they fulfill for you. They offer those services, and that's something that some companies want, but for us, I don't think it's a priority. So that means we can be a bit more picky with who we choose, how long it takes to produce them, all that kind of stuff. So yeah,
Yeah.
I just wanted to pick up on that before moving on.
Also, I think in terms of sustainability and fast fashion, because we are doing limited drops that will be, in theory, sold out before manufacture, should be zero waste and in like overproduction. So I think that also fits nicely with the mission. So yeah, anyway, what was I saying? Get a Grip Studio. They seem great. I've been like emailing one of the guys. They're like very responsive
Oh, nice.
and good. I get the impression that they're like small enough that we could, if it gets to the point, maybe we could get them to do the packaging for us, even if we had quite a specific, bespoke idea for what we wanted. I get the impression that you could send them the stuff and then they like put it all together,
Oh, cool.
because some of the things that they offer. So, for example, it's called like a hem seam tag. I don't know if you got any t-shirts that have it. It's like at the bottom of the t-shirt, it has like a label
Oh, yeah, 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 yeah.
that's sewn on, and it kind of like wraps around the base of the t-shirt.
Yeah, I know what you mean.
So, for example, with those, I really wanted to get one of those made, but they were like, in the minimum order with them is 50, and I was like, and it was going to cost like 70 quid or something.
Yeah.
It's not really worth it for 4 t-shirts. But he was like, if you get them made somewhere else and send them to us, then we can attach them for you.
Mm.
And I was like, well, if they're doing that and they also do packaging, then like, I get the impression that maybe they would, for a price, obviously. But if we're doing thousands and thousands and it costs like 10p extra a go, it's probably not the worst. And that was like that is the kind of prices we're talking when they were saying like removing the label from the t-shirt or adding a label in, not including the cost of the label, just the labor. It was like 10p, which obviously for them, if they're doing thousands of t-shirts, makes sense. I had always imagined having to get t-shirts shipped to like, realistically, your house, not my house, because I don't
Yeah.
have space.
Which
Which
at the
like,
start would be fun.
yeah,
But
the start would be
after a
fun,
year,
but
it would be tiresome, I
it could
imagine.
become a bit of a burden. So I think like doing, and I think, yeah, maybe like the first few we do that anyway, just so we can hone it ourselves. But once we know exactly what we want, I think there are options of getting people to do that for us. That leads me on to my final point, which is, how are we going to print onto the t-shirts? And there's many ways you can do that. And actually,
Some more sustainable than others as
yeah,
well, I imagine. Because if we're something we talked about in terms of there's some companies that are very sustainable and then offer like circular t-shirts, but then there's seems to be a drop in print quality so there's these trade-offs which we're
yeah.
gonna have to navigate.
So there's basically 4 main ones. So there's DTG, direct to garment, which is basically a big printer that prints directly onto the t-shirt. There's screen printing, which I guess most people will be familiar with, which is like you have these big screens that looks like a canvas. You then have like an area that is open, then one color at a time that gets applied to the t-shirt with actual physical manual labor applying printing ink And then I'll come into the advantages and disadvantages later.
Mm.
There's then vinyl transfer, which I guess is like something will get printed onto a vinyl, then that gets transferred onto the t-shirt. So that's like,
Right.
if you remember like iron-on things,
Yeah.
that's kind of similar to that. A more industrial process of doing it than that. And then there's a thing called dye sublimation, which is like
Wow. Sounds complicated.
that's quite an industrial process, and that's what you need to do. From my like very initial research into this, if you see a t-shirt that's like printed all over and not just in an
Yeah.
area on the front, they use this technique. But we can rule that out completely because it only works on synthetic materials. And I
Oh.
think we want to avoid that. So
Yeah, yeah,
I
yeah.
feel that's quite a nice reason to rule it out. Vinyl
Interesting.
transfer, from what I have read, is not very durable and basically won't last more than 50 washes. So I think
They're
you
your
can
classic t-shirts. Yeah, I'm sure everyone's got one where it just like starts
shit.
to
Yeah.
fade almost instantly.
Yeah, and it's not even. I think there's like a limit to the amount of color you can use as well. So basically, it comes down to screen printing and direct to garment printing. Direct to garment is what I've done for all the samples because screen printing is a much more laborious process that there is a minimum order of
Mm.
20. So I didn't want to
Okay.
get that would have been ended up with me having 100 t-shirts.
Yeah.
And this exercise is more about the actual product than the
Yeah.
printing. So we can do some more printing tests when we get there. I basically okay, the direct to garment is supposed to be good. It's slightly less durable than screen printing. Screen printing is going to be like the best in terms
Yeah.
of how long it will last. Direct to garment also is like less vibrant apparently. Like if you want like really punchy colors,
Mm.
screen printing is the way to go. And I actually have a direct to garment printed t-shirt that I made for a stag do like a few years ago, which I still wear.
Yeah. Nice.
And it is like it's basically like just to paint a picture in your mind and in the listener's mind. It's a t-shirt of my friend when he was in year 8 at school, but in the style of the Andy Warhol. Um, who's that famous actress that he did that? You know, the famous Andy Warhol painting.
Yeah. Not Marilyn Monroe.
Yeah, Marilyn Monroe, and it's like super colourful. Basically, what I'm saying is, it doesn't look that vibrant. Like it looks
Okay.
fine, but it doesn't have those like neon-y kind of
Interesting.
colour to it.
And that's something when we hope that there'll be bold and there'll be some of our artists will do quite bold designs and we want to really make sure that shines through. Okay.
Exactly.
Interesting.
So that makes me think that we should be leaning into screen printing, especially as it's like more durable and more colourful. They're like two key things for us. You can, it seems like the minimum order, especially for, with Get a Grip, it's minimum order of 20 on screen printing, which I think would be fine for what we're doing, unless
Yeah.
there's an animal even less than 20, I guess maybe there could be, but in general, it should be fine. And you can do up to 5 colours with them, but I have seen other companies where you can do up to 12 colours. So depending on the artwork, I think it could work. And it's like, I thought it'd be prohibitively expensive to do screen printing, but actually, it could, it seems to be about the same as direct garment.
Interesting. And did you start doing any research into, it's probably a whole other topic, but like if we have currently, I think most of our signups have been UK and then a few in Europe, is that going to present, it's going to present challenges, right?
Yeah, I don't know. I haven't got that far. I
Okay.
think basically the US is a great example at the moment with all the tariff things happening. I think there is a world where if we can find, ideally there would be a distributor that stocks Stanley Stella stuff so we could keep everything consistent. But if not, we could use a different product in the US. World start to get a bit messy then in terms of like numbers and
Yeah. I think we're going to have to just see how it evolves. If we end up with like a huge US following, we'll have to have a rethink.
yeah.
If it's mostly UK and Europe, it's different. I can't imagine beyond that it's going to be more complicated. Nice problems to have when
Yeah.
we get there, and
Will
we'll
people be
see.
willing to pay the premium themselves?
Yeah, and like I would like to avoid kind of flying and shipping stuff, which is
Well,
like a
yeah,
low
true.
order. So like manufacturing local somehow would be ideal,
Mm,
but then that brings in, it could be managing loads of different suppliers and stuff, and that could be challenging. So yeah, let's not
I
get
think that's
too far into that for
yeah.
now, apart from acknowledging it as a future challenge.
Yes, I think that's a good point. I think yeah, for now, find getting to a place where we're happy with a UK-based
Yeah,
solution, and then that can be like the gold standard for future products.
I like it.
So yeah, I guess that's where I got to.
And you've ordered some
Samples,
samples, you say. It's exciting. That's
samples
like
should be
gonna,
arriving.
hopefully we can do some more, actually start sharing some stuff about that as well. It's an ongoing challenge, is like having stuff to share beyond just talking around the ideas like this. So I think getting some samples done and moving that forward would be cool.
Yeah, I think it'd be some nice social media content. I also like the idea of doing a kind of dummy unboxing video using one of these as like a placeholder t-shirt. Can always blur it out.
Cool.
Like it.
Quiz?
Quiz, yeah.
All
The
right.
quiz. So a nice reward for anyone who's stuck it out this long is the quiz. I mean, I want to say the successes of last episode's quiz about hummingbirds. I wanted to keep it as kind of off topic. I was going to do a t-shirt based quiz, but we've talked about t-shirts enough today, so I thought let's go
Yeah.
back to animals.
Cool. Keep it animal based. Yeah.
And yet, just to tidy up, there was some confusion about whether hummingbirds could fly upside down or not.
Mm.
And they can fly upside down, actually upside down. And I think what they meant by that is if they're like flying towards like a flower to eat some nectar, they sometimes do that kind of like backwards, upside down. So search it on YouTube.
Yeah.
It's great
Matt sent
stuff.
me a video. It's very cool.
So we're getting back to basics with this quiz. It's about extinction, obviously a key topic for this podcast. Also, I'm not saying this is because I couldn't be bothered writing my own quiz, but I quite liked using someone else's quiz last
Yeah.
time because
Fun for you as well.
some of the questions are quite strange. But this one seemed quite good. But some of the like some of the questions are a bit weird,
Okay,
including the
cool.
first one. So we'll get into it. Question one: if red baseball caps are the species, which is the best metaphor for extinction? I don't know if they're talking about MAGA hats there.
Okay.
Anyway, is it A, your local store is running out of red baseball caps? Is it B, baseball caps are no longer carried by a chain store? Is it C, your own red baseball cap is falling apart into tatters? Or is it D, a final shutdown of the red baseball cap industry?
Yeah, it's D, surely. The shutdown of the red baseball cap industry. The red baseball cap is a species.
Yes, it is that. That's right. Yeah. Yeah. There you go. Question two, which is the best estimate of average background extinction rates? Is it 0 species per million per year, 1 per million per year, 10 per million per year, or 100 million per year?
I think it's 100 per million per year.
I hope it's not D every time. That would be disappointing. It is wrong. It's zero point 0.1 to 1 per million per year, according to this quiz. This is
Oh,
the issue with using other people's quizzes, that
yeah.
they're not fact checked at
Okay,
all.
yeah, I hadn't done the maths on that. I mean, it's still like one species in every million a year. There's a lot of species.
This is excluding mass extinctions. Species go extinct at a rate of about 0.1 to 1 species per million per year.
Which I guess that equates to the figure of around 150 a day or something.
Yeah, I think that would make sense. Okay. Characteristics of species that tend to contribute to extinction risk include life history, ecological niche, and geographic distribution. True or false?
What? You gave me three answers and then said true or false.
Yeah. Well, I guess it's either all of them or none of them.
Oh, I think all of them.
What's ecological niche mean?
It's like the every species has its own niche. So, like a good example would be the ecological niche of the feral pigeon would be
Mm,
hanging around in cities, roosting under bridges and eating people's leftover food and vomit.
I see.
Whereas like other birds don't occupy that niche quite as much. There might be some overlap, but pigeons have really got that niche nailed down.
Yeah, they love it. Yes, it says correct. Whilst no single set of characteristics explains extinction risk for all species on Earth, these three tend to be good predictors.
This is a very scientific quiz.
It
You
is,
found.
yeah. Okay, question 8. If extinction rates during a particular interval of time are lower than speciation rates,
Yeah.
what happens to species diversity? And can you answer what is a speciation rate?
Species. I think.
Oh, species. Is that when you get new species?
Yeah, like my knowledge of evolution is should be better, but I think that's right. When a species becomes its own distinct species.
So is it A, diversity goes up because there are more new species arising compared to species going extinct? Diversity goes up because there are fewer new species arising compared to species going extinct? Surely not. Diversity goes down because there are more new species arising compared to species going extinct? Or diversity goes down because there are fewer new... Wait. That's literally the same. So, okay, C and D are the same.
Okay, well, I think diversity will go up if more species are appearing, and compared to that, those go extinct.
So diversity goes up because there are more new species arising compared to species going extinct.
Yeah,
Surely it's that. Yes, correct. This is a very wordy quiz.
yeah.
I
Let's have
do.
one more, if there is one more. See if I can. I feel like this is the
Okay,
best I've
there's
done in a
two
quiz so
more,
far.
but one is extinction is a total wipeout of a species, ending both its physical presence on Earth and existence of its genes. True or false?
It's an interesting one. It's
It's
quite a
complicated
yeah.
because
Like I
you
mean,
can.
as we've seen in the recent news, that like you can use genetic material to try and recreate species that have gone extinct.
Hmm.
So the genes physically don't exist, um, but they might do in like a if they well now they might be able to keep them and store them somehow. But yeah, I
I think
guess
this quiz was probably written before the dire
yeah.
situation with the
So
wolves.
and even that, yeah, that's like they've just not really created anyway. Without going into that, it's they've kind of just modified an existing wolf to create something similar to a dire wolf rather than bringing that back. So I'm going to say, yeah, I guess the answer is you can't.
The answer is false or true.
The genetic information, physical information also dies with it. I mean, I guess it's stored on it could be stored on a computer in data.
Interesting. Well, that is incorrect.
Okay.
It says, whilst the species is no longer living on Earth, its genes live on through descendants and other related species.
Okay. Yeah, yeah, I suppose. Yeah. Yeah. It's genes. Yeah.
We're laughing and
Okay.
we're learning.
Yeah. Brilliant.
That was probably my worst quiz so far, but we can't win every time.
Yeah. And maybe
So,
we learned something. I feel
um,
like I need to go and swat up on my evolutionary biology.
yeah.
Cool. Maybe we'll get one of my good friends is an evolutionary biologist. Maybe we'll get him on one time. And
Is that Jim?
yeah,
Yeah, nice.
and he'll bore everyone about how we shouldn't be so worried about individual species and what even is a species and all this kind of stuff, which ruins the brand.
Yeah, to ruin the whole thing. I mean, it's good to hear from
Yeah,
all sides of the coin.
exactly.
That's what they say. He also added me on LinkedIn following your LinkedIn post.
Nice. Well, thanks for that quiz. Yeah, and that topic of diving into the manufacturers. I think it's going to be fun to get some samples, see what they're like. We're just scratching the surface, it feels, but as with everything with this brand, we want to keep moving, do some stuff, not try and be perfect straight away, do the best we can, and then move on from there. So, yeah, thanks for that.
You're very welcome.
Cool. And we'll be back in a couple of weeks' time, maybe with an episode on video and content and stuff like that. Maybe something
Promo.
else.
Yeah, sounds good.
In the meantime, we're going to try and post some more stuff. You'll notice if you're a subscriber, you'll have got a first kind of email update. We're going to be doing more stuff like that. If you haven't already, do go to nolongerknown.com, get on that list for the latest updates and stuff. So we're not just doing the podcast, we're doing other things as well. And yeah, we'll see you on the next one.
Goodbye.